Hi, I'm Deboki, and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I am going to be going over my general reading / booktube highlights and lowlights for the year. And when I say reading, I mean reading and also talking about books on booktube, because at this point, my reading and my experience on booktube are so intrinsically linked together. So I'm going to start with the highlights, then we're going to go to the lowlights, and then I'm going to get into my goals for this year now, for 2022. So my first highlight for 2021 is that I feel like I had a pretty good set of nonfiction reading projects for the year, like things that were very oriented around nonfiction and that got me to really focus a lot of my time on reading nonfiction books. So there are three things in particular. I was a judge for the BookTube Prize for the nonfiction category. Nicole and I are continuing to do our nonfiction book club, which is our monthly book club where we go back and forth picking out a nonfiction book to read together. And then the third thing is that I did a podcast miniseries for Scientific American for their Science Talk podcast. It's a 4-episode series, and in each episode I covered 2 nonfiction science or nature writing kind of books. And I think any single one of these projects would have been really great for me on their own, but I think doing them together was really awesome because they've really helped me talk about nonfiction in different ways and to also explore different types of nonfiction. The BookTube Prize in particular, I don't have a lot of control over what books are getting, what I'm gonna have to read for the BookTube Prize. So, I read a biography on Sylvia Plath that I would never have read. And even though I didn't necessarily super love it, I am glad that I went through the experience of reading it. Nonfiction Book Club, Nicole and I have been doing this now for maybe 1.5, a little bit more than that, years at this point. And I think over this past year, I feel like we've gotten into a really cool groove of trying out books that are very much kind of up a particular alley, but also branching out into other weird books that, yeah, I wouldn't have picked out, but that Nicole has had on her shelf, or I think in my case, I probably have books picked out that she might not have thought to pick up either. And so it's really fun to see what she picks out and go back and forth month to month like that. Just because, yeah, it's cool to be subjected to my friend's book taste because she has interesting books on her shelves, and to be okay, cool, I guess I'm gonna read that book now too. And then we're gonna talk about it and see what we think. So yeah, I mean, Nonfiction Book Club is just a lot of fun for us to begin with. And then on top of that, it has this, it's weird to call it the added bonus because the entire point of the thing is to read the nonfiction. But yes, it comes with the bonus of that I am reading more nonfiction and getting to talk about it with someone who I like to talk about books with. And the Scientific American podcast series was interesting because of all of those different projects. That was the narrowest focus. That's the one where all of my books were science and nature adjacent. They all had a very clear kind of, Scientific American-ness to them. They had to all be compelling to a Scientific American audience. And so that kind of narrows the range of what we're focusing on. And for someone like me, my job is to write about science. Doing that was just a really good exercise of engaging with different ways that people approach writing about science, whether that's through a very personal lens, whether that's through a historical lens, whether that's through kind of approaching it almost like a set of travel essays. It was just really, really cool to sit down and kind of force myself to work through all of these books and to compare them and to compare their approaches and see how they talk about similar subjects in their own specific frameworks. So between all three of these projects, I think over the course of 2021, I just got a lot more variety in my nonfiction that I've had in previous years. And I also had to think more about what it is I'm looking for in nonfiction and actually think about how I convey that to other people, which was a really good challenge for me. I really enjoyed it, and I think it's just helped me kind of solidify a little bit more, not still fully, but a little teeny bit more, what it is I am looking for when I am reading something that is nonfiction. Highlight number 2. One of my goals for the year was to read 15 audiobooks just because I wanted to get a little bit back more into audiobook listening, and I haven't officially counted, but I feel pretty good about the fact that I think I've gotten pretty close to that. Part of the reason I haven't counted though is because I haven't strictly been listening to audiobooks just all the way through. What I think has been turning out to be a really good approach for me with audiobooks is to combine them with the physical books overall. So this is something that I've been doing a lot with that nonfiction reading this year, but it's also been something that's helping me get into books that I would otherwise have a really hard time getting into. The most notable example of this for me from this past year is that I read Dune this way. I am not a big sci-fi person. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I kind of had a sense from the beginning that Dune the book, like, I enjoyed the movie, but I thought that Dune the book would not be a book that I would immediately be able to get into. And I don't know if that's the case or not, because I did not start right off with the physical copy, but the audiobook did actually do a pretty good job of getting me drawn in. I will note that when I was Googling the audiobook before I officially bought it, there is some controversy about some of the production choices that have gone into it, but that I didn't fully understand once I finally listened. There are complaints about the choices made to have, at some points, just, a narrator, and at other points to have, a full voice cast. I don't know, I think the choices all made sense to me. And I think there might also be some passages that are cut out, but from what I've read, it's not really that significant. There's not really that many passages that have been trimmed from the audiobook version, so I don't think that I missed that much. Maybe I did. Maybe that's what it took for me to enjoy Dune. So overall, I'm really glad that I listened to the audiobook and did my combo audiobook, physical book reading, because it was good to use that as a way to get into a book that I think I would have had a hard time getting into otherwise. And that's helped me out, like I said, with other nonfiction books this year. That Sylvia Plath biography, Red Comet, it's 900 to 1,000 pages long. I would not have been able to get through that strictly just through reading the physical book. Having the audiobook at 2.8x speed was really super necessary for me for that one. And maybe I should add this, because I don't know if this is fully clear, but the reason why I think audiobook helps me is especially with books that are written a certain way, and this is something I've experienced with Jane Austen even, right, whose books I really enjoy, but sometimes it's just the writing is just written in a specific rhythm or something that I cannot hear it correctly in my head or something when I'm reading it on the page. So I think for me, what it is with audiobooks is that I just really like hearing someone kind of perform the text and giving the text a certain rhythm that helps me get into it. And my last highlight, and I'm putting this at the end because it is kind of an obvious highlight, but also I have some caveats that we're going to get to very shortly around it. I read a lot of books this year. I read, according to my table that I keep, I read 123 books, which is a pretty decent amount. Like I said, I have some pretty big caveats around that. I don't think the number of books you read are an assessment of your moral standing as a reader. So I just want to be very clear about that. And I do think there are some trade-offs to that reading, as we'll talk about shortly. But one of the reasons why I am at least happy about this number in the context of the way I read this year is, at the very least, I feel like I was always reading something this year. And that is, for me, a pretty satisfying thing overall. And I've talked about this in previous yearly wrap-ups, I'm pretty sure, where one of the things that reading has been doing for me, just over a long term, is helping me break other bad habits, like going on the internet and going onto Twitter and Reddit and making myself mad, basically, is how I've talked about it before. Signing onto the internet just to get mad at something. And obviously there's lots of reasons to sign on to the internet. I use the internet for plenty of things, and I also still go onto it to get mad. So I haven't broken that habit completely, but I'm glad that in general, reading has been this thing that I am at least doing consistently in this way for the past year, and that it's helped me, I don't know, just focus on something else, to kind of check out from everything else that's going on and just kind of focus on something that is, just right there and ready to read. Okay, so those were my highlights for the year, and now we are going on to my lowlights. And I really feel like my lowlights for the year are more like a multi-part cloud of angst that are not quite clearly defined. It does not all quite cohere together into a nice theme the way I want it to make this video a little bit more comprehensible. But I'm going to try to divide it into two things that will hopefully make sense. And I think they're also both connected to what I was just talking about in terms of having read a lot of books this year. This is the dark side of that. It's not actually that dark, but it is just I don't know, stuff I've been thinking about. Okay, so first off, this is something I have talked about in a previous video, and I think I've talked about it in other contexts. My reading for the year has pretty much been dominated by nonfiction and romance. And for the most part, that does not make me that upset. I like nonfiction, I like romance. I'm pretty happy to read both of those for, the good part of my year. There were a few fantasy and sci-fi books in there, but not really that much. And I think overall, like I said, these are two genres that I am really enjoying. There's a lot to read in nonfiction. There's a lot to read in romance. So I think it's only natural that the more you dive into it, the more you kind of stay on those specific paths. At the same time, I think I'm starting to get into a little bit too much of a comfort zone with my reading, where I'm getting too comfortable, not with just staying in these genres, but also basically bouncing back and forth, where it's like I'll read a lot of nonfiction for like very intensely for whatever project that I'm doing, and then like bounce to romance as my like antidote to like having read that nonfiction, and then like once I've gotten a little bit too much of romance, then bounce back to the nonfiction, like basically kind of like going back and forth between those two, and then not really leaving much space for anything else. And so the overall effect is that I feel like when I look back on my reading, there's kind of like this feeling of like blurriness, like it's just kind of all has congealed together. And I feel that most strongly when I think about the idea of doing a 2021 favorites or least favorites books list. I have been trying to get myself to do one, and I may still do one. I have like the outline of it that I'm gonna do. I know what books I would talk about, but I'm just not feeling super inspired to do it, because I just feel like when I look back on my reading from last year, it all just feels like as a mass, fine. Like it is all fine. And that's not a comment on the individual books, because there are some really spectacular books that I've read last year. Like there are definitely some books from that, like from this past year, that I'm going to look back on as like favorite reads, and that I'm going to think back on really fondly about. And also a few books that were frustrating in really clarifying ways for me as well, where it's like, I am not enjoying this book, but the fact that I'm not enjoying it is something that is really instructing me about like what it is I am looking for books in overall. So like all of that has been really meaningful, but just like the overall idea of digging through that and processing it right now just feels like, I don't know, I'm not particularly excited to do it. And I think another part of this is like, if you're reading a lot of books in a year, you get used to a certain pacing of how you're reading, where for me at least, the overall effect has been that if a book takes me longer than a week to read, I'm like, what's wrong with the book? Like this is taking me too long. I get impatient with it in a way that I just like don't necessarily love. Like I want to be able to like sit down and have a book drag out if it needs to. Like there are some books that are meant to be read quickly, and there are some books that are meant to be read slowly, and I'm having a harder time digging through books that, you know, take a little bit more time. And I think especially like the other like obvious effect is like, because I am not getting out of my comfort zone, I'm not challenging myself with books like from say like literary fiction or sci-fi, where like I know that they're going to take me a little bit more time to get into. Like I'm going to need to give them more than a chapter to see how I feel about them. And it's just hard for me to give them that chance, because I'm just so used to these categories of books that feel so familiar and that I know how to dive into a little bit better. My other low light is something that, again, like I feel like I have been complaining about this for like a while, and it's so boring. And so I apologize for this. And also like, it's not unique to me in any way, shape, or form. And a lot of it is stuff that is just at this point, even though it's been going on for so long, I just feel so vague about it that like, it's not going to be a very satisfying discussion. But like, I've been in like a weird funk with internet communities overall. I think like the last year or two have really amplified it. And I think over the past year, it's reached a point where I'm starting to get a little cynical about internet communities in a way that I just don't like. Like, I don't like being cynical. I don't like feeling like I am going into a community just to be like angry at things. I don't like that feeling about me. It's like, it's a trait of mine that I do not want. And I think like there are times where yes, it's about the community, but there are also times where it's about me and how I'm engaging with it. And I think over the past year, figuring out the difference between those two things has been kind of, I don't know, a journey. I'm still working my way through it. And to be clear, this is not a booktube specific thing. I am like in a general funk with like internet fandom in general. I think part of this is from having spent too much time on reality TV subreddits, because they are the worst. So a lot of this is on me. Like just my experience of the internet is so shaped by my own shitty choices, but here we are. So with all that said, what are my goals for next year? For now, I'm keeping it pretty loose, which is what I actually kind of always do. I'm not very good at setting specific goals because I don't trust myself with them. But I think one of my goals, and I don't know how to phrase this, but this is related to that idea of trying to be able to embrace reading more slowly when I need to. I want to read fewer books, maybe, I think. I don't know. What it is I just want to be able to focus on taking my time with books, and I want to be able to embrace books that are maybe going to take a little bit more space, that are going to take a little bit more whatever, just more of my time, and be able to like let myself sit down, enjoy that process, because otherwise, I'm just going to be speeding through books that are going to blur together and not necessarily enjoy everything I read, and, you know, end up at the end of the year being like, what the fuck did I even read, you know? So somehow the goal is to maybe read less than 123 books next year, which I've already achieved, which is why I cannot phrase the goal that way, but whatever, you guys understand what I mean. Another one of my goals kind of related to this is to read more sci-fi and speculative fiction. One of the things that I got a lot, especially from working on the Scientific American podcast, where I was reading a lot of science and nature writing, was a lot of curiosity about how writers use science and nature as a metaphor. And like, that's partly because, again, like my job is science writing, so I am curious about it just for like curiosity's sake, but also for my own like edification, so I can hopefully be more creative about how I use science and nature as a metaphor. And so I think nonfiction science writing and nature writing is a super great way to do that, but also there's this whole world of sci-fi where people are being so imaginative with their use of science, like with Dune. Like, it's not my favorite book or anything, but it was really interesting to see how Herbert was using different ideas around the environment and like genetics and stuff to build this story, and kind of how they played into the overall like ideas that he's exploring in the book beyond just the science of it. So I just want to do that, and sci-fi has not been an easy genre in the past for me to get into. I get very hung up on a lot of those sciencey details and trying to like parse through them, especially because often, I mean, I don't know how true this is, but I feel like there's a lot of physicsy stuff in sci-fi that like I have zero desire to fully unpack because I hate physics. But that's okay. That is also a function of just probably what sci-fi I have heard about. But I know that there is plenty of other sci-fi out there, and so I kind of just want to go into it and see what I can find and learn a little bit more from how people approach science in their fiction. And as far as BookTube goes, as far as like the whole internet community thing goes, I think my goal is just to like chill out a bit, like just, you know, just chill, like just enjoy it. I've been thinking about this because Claire reads books. She did a video about like her feelings on 2021, and everything she said about like kind of the way that she had found making booktube videos difficult to make in the last year really resonated with me, especially a lot of like the feeling of like needing her goal for the year to be to think less. That really struck a chord with me, because I genuinely like being on booktube. I like being part of the community, and I just feel like not overthinking it is like a thing that I need to do in general. Like just with my life, I have reached a real place of being able to overthink anything. Like every year I think I've maxed out my overthinking capacity, and I find new ways to work myself up into a tizzy over something completely nonsensical, right? And so I think one of my goals for this year is just to like focus on making booktube easier and more fun for me to do. One of the things that like Clara talked about was like kind of moving over to maybe not necessarily relying as much on scripts. Again, super resonated with that. I think when I started booktube, I don't think I ever fully scripted videos. I think I wrote pretty detailed outlines so that I always knew like what I was going to talk about, especially because I'm always the worst at remembering how I'm going to describe a plot summary. So I think like that has always been useful. But over time, I moved over to scripting my videos much more heavily because I thought like, hey, if I script what I'm going to say ahead of time, I'm not going to like have to film myself saying like the same thing in like 50 different ways until I hit on a version that sounds right. And that's going to make my filming easier. It's going to make my editing easier. And there are times when that's true, and there are definitely times where I'm like glad that I have scripted out what I'm gonna say. At the same time, most of my videos don't need that. Like they don't like need me to fully script everything out. So the fact that I'm like telling myself I need to write this whole script out ahead of time just becomes like a thing that just gets in the way, and usually ends up with me not making the video. Like it just ends up with me, well, like having like this really half-assed outline that I keep telling myself I'm gonna turn into an actual script, and then I never even like turn it into anything at all, you know? So I think like for this year, I still like fully definitely have scripted videos in mind that are going to take a little bit more time for me to work on and to like piece through everything I want to say, but I also want to like do more chatty videos. Like this is a little bit chattier than what I've been doing in the past. I've been doing more library check-ins like over the past few months, and so I think that is kind of like where I'm leaning towards in general, where it's like trying to find ways to kind of just like have fun with booktube as like the actual thing is, which is just like a bunch of us making videos about books on the internet. Like it doesn't need to be that much more than that. And then when I want to like have it be a little bit more thought out and like planned ahead of time, like letting that happen, but just giving myself space to just enjoy the rest of it and just relax, just chill out. Those are my thoughts on how my reading and booktube life went in 2021. Thanks to you guys for watching. I hope you all had a good 2021, as good as it could be, because it was a lot for a year. And I hope you guys have a good 2022. Bye.